All right, here we go. Trying something new today. This is StreamYard I'm using. I just started setting it up today. So we'll see how it goes. Let me know if you guys can hear me okay. It automatically regulates the sound input. So hopefully it should be okay. I'll just watch for everybody to kind of respond in the chat. Oh, I got to turn that off. I had a browser open that had it. So it looks like it was working. So I'm not going to be this big the entire time because we're doing something very specific with the stream today. I am going to be taking your questions, and the Q&A can be on any topic. It does not have to be about family history, but I am going to be working on a family tree while we're streaming, and I'm going to start one from scratch because I've had people asking. It's kind of a burgundy, I think. I've had people asking for a while for me to kind of show how to get started on a family tree. So I'm actually going to use a somewhat famous person who I know has a very famous ancestor, and see if we can't work our way back to that famous ancestor and do it that way. So, hey, Jonathan, what's going on? So I'll be taking your questions, and we're going to be working on this as we go along, and I'll try to update you on some things that folks have been asking about as we go along. I've got a number of goals, and I'm going to probably release a video sometime later this week, just kind of laying out some of the goals for 2024, not only for this channel, but for all the channels. And that includes what plans may or may not be in the works for the podcast, since I get a lot of people asking about that. Do I still watch football, soccer? Absolutely. I watched West Brom yesterday. That went pretty well. Actually, I also watched a little bit of the Aston Villa Manchester United game, which was really good. Keenan, you drove by Ohio 5 hours ago. Very cool. So here's what we're gonna do. The actor Matthew Fox, if you've ever seen Lost or We Are Marshall or some other things, we're gonna do his family tree. And why Matthew Fox? Well, because his great grandfather is a pretty famous figure in American history. And he also has some pretty interesting European roots that I'm hoping we can get back to. So I have actually not done anything looking at his family tree. So I'm going to start this as though I was starting a brand new family tree for somebody to show people how they can kind of get started in doing research. Am I happy with the Pistons' historical lose streak? I am, because I think the previous record holders were my Cleveland Cavaliers. So I don't know much, Shalva, about Georgia at all. Very little, unfortunately. That's something I definitely need to learn more about. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to shrink myself a little bit here, and we're going to put the little banner up. And as we actually, if I get some questions that I want to address, I'll pop them up on the screen. So, for example, here's one right here. Any site you can recommend on you doing some research. One of your friends has an ancestor that served as an officer in the Macedonian struggle in the Ottoman Empire. I don't know specifically for that, but I'd probably start with familysearch.org, which is the Mormon church site. It's free, and they have a lot of foreign records. It's not always easy to browse, and I'll show you some of that as we go along. Colton, we are related then. I descend from two of Daniel Boone's sisters. So we're going to go ahead and just start, and I'm on ancestry.com, and I'm just creating a tree from scratch here, and we're going to put in the basic information. He was born 14 July 1966 in Abington, Pennsylvania. I don't know what county that is. Is that Lackawanna County? It looks like it's Lackawanna County. So Lackawanna. John B. Magruder, I don't know a lot about him beyond just his Civil War history. So his third cousin once removed, a close relation. Yeah, it's fairly close. That means that, so say you got a first cousin, your grandkids and their great grandkids would be third cousins once removed. So that's the relation there. And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, you guys see Battle Guide in the chat. One of my absolute favorite channels on YouTube. You have to check them out. How the Mormons have such a great website? Well, because and I'm not an expert on the Mormons, but you can, as a Mormon, be baptized for your dead ancestors. And so it's very important for them to research their family tree so that they can do that, is my understanding. So we can get a little bit of information from Matthew Fox's Wikipedia page about who his parents are, but then from there, we're going to have to do this on our own. So Francis G. Fox is his father's name. Now, normally, in most cases, you would probably know this information already. I don't know why it just went to starting a new tree just out of nowhere. So that's really strange. We got to, I guess, start it over again. I'm just going to put 1966 for now. So I'll get back to the questions in just a minute, guys. I want to make sure I get this set up right. Add father. So we have Francis G. And we don't have any kind of information about his status as far as living or dead when he was born, things like that. We're going to go ahead and create this tree. And now we'll go ahead and add his mother, which is Loretta B. Igano. It looks like that's how it's spelled. So again, I don't know if she's deceased or living. So basically this is what we have. So when you're starting out, you're going to want to, and I apologize if it's kind of small on your screen. If you're watching on like a phone or something, you're obviously not going to be able to see this very well. I'll try to zoom in from time to time on it so you can see it a little better. In fact, maybe I can just go ahead and do that on here. We'll do it this way. There we go. That makes it a little easier for you to see. Let me get caught up on the chat here. Mr. Knowledge Man, am I a fan of any historical mythologies? Yeah, Greek mythology is one that I'm really into, and I know my son Eli's really into it because he loves Percy Jackson. So he's really learning a lot about Greek mythology right now. So that's one I definitely find a lot of interest in. A dark and stormy Scottish night. Yeah, I saw Rangers had to cancel their game today. Not because the pitch wasn't in decent enough shape, but because they were concerned people couldn't get to Ibrox. So it must be pretty rough over there right now. It rained here today in Ohio. It's pretty warm in Ohio, surprisingly, for this time of year. I have never worn a full kit or costume for a reenactment, unfortunately. It's definitely something I'd like to do down the road. So basically, the first thing you want to do is you want to talk to whoever the oldest folks are in your family. Thankfully for me, when I started doing research, I was in my teens. And so I had a lot of family that were still around, including like my great aunt who was born in 1926, who knew a lot of our ancestors that were born in like the 1860s. She knew some of those people. So she was able to share a lot with me. And I was able to get back to, in some cases, my great-great-grandparents just based on talking to people. But in this case, we don't have that information available to us. So we're going to have to really start from scratch. And we're going to have to look for Matthew Fox's father, knowing that he lived in Abingdon, Pennsylvania in 1966 is going to help us some with him. But we don't know a lot more than that because we don't know where he was born or anything like that. That really, really sets it kind of hard for us to start. So in most cases, the most important thing is that if you can get back at least to the 1950s, you'll be in good shape because we have the 1950 census now available. And that helps a lot. So hello from Menor. Hey, very cool. Hello up the road there. What is my stance on the German Empire? Could you be a little more specific? I'm not entirely sure what that means. Do I know what the ranks are in the U.S. military? Yes, I do. Um, so the first part of this is going to be a little tricky, just because we don't know anything about Matthew Fox's. Let's see. So his father was a consultant for an oil company who raised longhorn cattle and horses, because they end up living in Wyoming or something. So I'm trying to see if I can find something about his dad that'll give me a little bit more information. Because that'll be a little tricky. If not, we might just have to do somebody else just for the sake of keeping this moving. But I don't know how old his parents were when he was born, but I can at least do this. So let's go ahead and do this. We can put his residence, because we know at some point he lived in Abingdon, Pennsylvania, right? So we'll say he was living there in 1966, and that'll actually help us a lot. Ancestry does have some Russian records, but FamilySearch.org is going to have a lot more of them. So somebody else might actually have done his family tree at some point, which might help us a little bit. We definitely have some Francis Foxes in here, but there's no indication which one it is. See, most of what I'm doing right now, you're not going to have to worry about, because you're going to know probably in most cases when your father was born and where. So you're going to be able to nail some of that down a lot easier. What we might be able to do, and here's what I'm going to do, is I'm actually going to see if we can't find his parents' marriage record. Because if we can find his parents' marriage record, that's going to actually give his parents' birthplaces and dates, and probably even their parents' names. Igano is her name. So I'm going to sign in here. Do I take video requests? You can honestly just leave them on a comment on any video, and I'll see them because I read all the comments. Have I done much Irish genealogy? Yes, it is. It is more of a challenge than UK records, typical UK records, especially because there's a lot of overlap on Irish names. They tended to use the same names more often. So my wife's great-grandfather was Irish, and so I've done a lot of work on that line, and it's been tough. It's O'Neill, which is the actor Ed O'Neill is actually part of that same family. So let's do this. Let's look for his mother. See if their marriage record is on FamilySearch.org. And see, one of the things you'll notice is that it's not giving me the exact name. It's giving me similar names. In genealogy, spelling is pretty much worthless, because you have to remember, even 100 years ago, a lot of people couldn't read or write. My great-grandfather was a brick worker. He couldn't read or write. He could barely sign his own name. And so he didn't even know how to spell his own last name. My last name is spelled differently on my great-grandparents' tombstone than it is on his parents' tombstone or on my grandparents' tombstone. Yeah, this is going to be tricky. So we're going to try to narrow this down a little more. This one's a lot harder so far than I expected it to be. So it doesn't look like we're going to get the marriage record either. So we might have to go with a different one, just for the sake of being able to keep this moving because I'm not finding his parents right off the bat. Janine, thank you. And your mom was adopted, but you never got her adoption records. It depends on the state and it depends on how long it's been, whether or not those are available. So I couldn't tell you specifically, but there are ways using DNA to narrow that stuff down. Like I was able to figure out that my wife's grandfather, that his father was not the man he inherited his last name from. It was that O'Neill line, because my wife's maiden name's Watkins, but her great grandfather wasn't a Watkins. He was an O'Neill. And we didn't know that from records. We figured that out from DNA. And I'll talk about that a little bit when I get a chance about how you can use DNA to do research. What got me into genealogy was actually when I was in high school, my best friend's dad started working on his family tree. And I just thought it sounded really interesting. And so I started doing it. What's my favorite piece of alternative history, or what piece of alternate history do I wish actually happened? And thank you for that, Stephen. Honestly, that's a tough one. Of the ones that I've done, I honestly think Germany winning World War I quickly and decisively, like in 1914, might be the one that has the best outcome for the world moving forward. But I don't know that for sure. All right, so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna do something different, just so we can keep this moving along, and I can kind of show you how this all works. So let's do a different line altogether. I'm just gonna create a new tree. Yeah, I have a lot of trees for people that I've worked on over time. All right, so who can we start with? Let's start with somebody that's born, say, in the 1920s to make it a little more interesting. So I'll take some suggestions if you guys have any suggestions as far as who we can start with for this. Coffin Kill, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for the long-term support. Could not do this without you guys. And I am forever grateful for the community that we've got. Rory, I have listened to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History podcast. It's fantastic. To me, it's my favorite podcast. I don't listen to a ton of podcasts, but that is definitely my favorite of the ones that I do listen to. Maxime Munger, thank you. Did I know that Frederick the Great was a grandson of King George the First? I don't think I knew that off the top of my head, but I'm not the least bit surprised, as they're all related to each other. All those royalty, just like Kaiser Wilhelm was a grandson of Queen Victoria. So none of that surprised me. Yes, I was looking at actor Matthew Fox from Lost, but I probably should have done a little prep ahead of time and figured out who his grandparents were before we got started, because I just don't. It was a little more tricky to find information on his parents than I thought. Yeah, Alex, that's actually what I was hoping to work back to. He is a great grandson of Union General George Meade. So that was why I chose Matthew Fox, was to be able to work back to General Meade on his family tree. So Anne Frank, I'm going to stick to an American just because it's easier. John Wayne. Okay, so John Wayne's real name was not John Wayne. It was Marion Morrison. So let's go ahead and pull up John Wayne. We'll do John Wayne. That sounds fun. So he was born Marion Robert Morrison on May 26, 1907. That'll be nice and easy to do. He'll be easy to track going back that far. Where was he born? He was born in Winterset, Iowa. So we'll actually get to track his family's migration west. So that'll be fun. Died 11th June 1979 in Los Angeles. There's a lot of Los Angeleses, so we're just going to go Los Angeles County, California. So his parents, let's take a look. His father was Clyde Leonard Morrison, born in 1884. And he was the son of a American Civil War veteran, but we're not going to put that in there just yet. I'm going to show you how to do it. Looks like he's got some Ohio roots. Mary Molly Alberta Brown was his mother. And you always want to find the maiden names if you can, because that's obviously going to make things much easier. And we'll just say 1885 for her. So there you have it. We've got John Wayne started, and then I'll show you kind of how we do this from here. Favorite genealogy discovery. I've had so many, but nothing tops finding out that my fifth great grandfather on my father's side captured and hanged my fifth great grandmother on my mother's side, or fifth great grandfather on my mother's side. Have I ever read "Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee" by D. Brown? I have not, but I am familiar with it. Yeah, Weeping Scorpion. I did most of my family tree before Ancestry.com even existed. Had to go to places like the Western Reserve Library up in Cleveland, and I can do more on a person's family tree in 30 minutes now than I did in 3 years when I first got started with mine. It's definitely a different world for sure. What are my favorite musicals, Mr. Knowledge Man? And thank you for that. Hamilton, Beetlejuice, Les Miserables. What else have I really liked? Hadestown was really good. We saw that recently. What else have I seen that I really enjoyed? I think those are the ones that come to mind off the top of my head that are my favorites. Yeah, so JD, that's exactly what I want to do. Is we're going to take a look at his grandfather, and I'll show you guys how to find his Civil War records and figure out exactly what unit he was with and those sorts of things. So that'll definitely be something we can do. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look. First of all, we're going to find out what we can find out about his parents. And so Ancestry does these hints, but you've got to be super, super careful with the hints, because the hints will match you up with anybody that looks in a record like it could be that person. You don't want to just assume that it is that person. You have to look at the hints, the record hints, in the context of what you do already know. I'll give you a perfect example. I had a third great grandmother whose name was the exact same name as somebody else who was born the same year as her in the same county, but obviously had different parents. And I found someone who wrote a whole book on that family history, but got the parents wrong and used the wrong set of parents for that person. And so everything was worthless from that standpoint. Ralph Doherty, your fourth great grandfather was wounded at Chancellorsville, died in a Union prison hospital. Wow. That's interesting. And Lorenzo, thank you. How do I feel having fans as young as my own kids? I love it, because that means that young people are into history, and that's what's most important. So I'm glad for that. Do another question here, and then let's take a look at some of this. Jacob, thank you for that. Have I considered going to California to explore that state's history? Yes, I definitely want to do that. I want to get up to Northern California. I actually want to trace the brother of my fifth great grandfather who died over there, killed by Indians, is what our family has said, as part of the gold rush. So Marion Morrison, born in 1907. So what that means is, if we look at the 1910 census, he's going to be 2 or 3 years old in Madison County, Iowa. So let's just go ahead and go to the hints and see if we can find him in that. And obviously there's going to be a lot of hints for a famous person like John Wayne. But we want to look specifically at records. Records like the census. So there's the 1910 census, Madison County, Iowa, Clyde. Now you'll see here it says Clyde S. Morrison, but what do we remember from our record? We have Clyde L. Leonard Morrison. Well, why would that happen? Well, it's pretty simple. Whoever transcribed the census record thought the S was an L. So you have to kind of ignore things like that. And those are the kinds of things you just learn over time, is that okay, somebody just screwed that up, because then you see 1920, Clyde L. Morrison. So I want to go to that 1910 census because that's the one that's closest to his birth. We actually here we have an Iowa birth record. So this actually has his actual birth date there, but we don't need that because we already know that information. So here's the 1910 census. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. So Union Jack the Ripper, thank you for that. Interesting fact of my family line. The story is your ancestors provided gunpowder to a United Irishman uprising in 1798. When it failed, they fled. And I'll say this. My experience with stories that get passed down in the family is that there tends to be some truth to them. Maybe the story has gotten changed over time, but by and large, that stuff gets passed down in the family because there's some truth to it. So let's go ahead and take a look at this actual census record, and I'll show you what it is that you're going to look for in a census record and what it's going to tell you. I'm going to try to zoom in on this. It might be hard for you guys to read a little bit. So here you have Clyde L. Morrison. This is Madison County, Iowa, Madison Township. So we can see from this that Clyde is, it looks like 28. He's born in Illinois. His father was born in Ohio. His mother was born in Illinois. And again, with records, go with the preponderance of evidence. Don't just say, oh, he says his father was born in Ohio. That must be true. And then ignore anything that says otherwise. Because a lot of times in these records where people are self-reporting, they're not always right. So my third great grandfather, his name was Joseph Whitaker. He was born in Tipton outside of Birmingham, England in 1842. But when he was like 2 years old, the family moved to Glasgow, Scotland, and all of his younger siblings were born in Scotland. So then when his daughter was filling out these census records, she said her father was born in Scotland. Well, Dad had a Scottish accent. He grew up in Scotland. She doesn't know that he was born in England and moved to Scotland when he was like a year and a half old. She just remembers Dad's Scottish. So that's what she put. That doesn't always necessarily mean it's right. Patrick Stewart, thank you for that. Gilbert Vale was captured at Chickamauga, died in Andersonville. So does he have a grave there? You definitely should get to Andersonville. It's a really cool place to visit. Illinois, Ohio, mother born in Illinois. You can even see this is a really tough one to read. But it looks like he's a pharmacist in a drugstore is what this appears to say. You can find out if they can read or write. Some of the records, like the 1910 census, are going to say whether or not they're a veteran. And it might even say what war they fought in. So there's a lot of that kind of information you can find in these records. So we're going to go ahead and I'm actually going to attach this to the family tree. And so this is going to give me some additional information, like the fact that he was born in Illinois. Now it estimates 1885. Why? Because it said he was 20. It actually said he was 25 in that record. But that's just because, he hadn't turned 26 yet because he hadn't hit his birthday. So Mary, born in Nebraska. So that's more information that we got that we didn't have before. So those are the kinds of things that we're going to learn by doing this. So I'm actually going to go back to his father now so we can start learning a little more. So now you see here that it's actually suggesting to me parents. So again, Be very careful with this if you're using Ancestry about these suggestions, because a lot of times these suggestions for parents are going to come from other people's family trees. So that means if that other person got the research wrong, you're just assuming that they got it right and you're adding that to your tree. And people make mistakes all the time. I've seen people post pictures of an ancestor that they say were from 1810. Well, there was no photography in 1810. So right off the bat, you know that's wrong, but they just saw a name on it or somebody else told them it was that person and they went with it. The person died in 1810. There's no way there's a photograph of him. So a lot of times you have to be careful. But in this case, I do know that that is his father. But what would we do to find Clyde and to find his father? Well, let's look for a Clyde Leonard Morrison that might be about 16 years old in 1900. Now, the 1890 census records are every 10 years in the United States, every 10 years in the UK as well. But they were like 1911, 1921, 1931, whereas U.S. Census is always on the year ending in 0 every 10 years. 1890 census was almost completely destroyed in a fire, so we don't have much of it. We're not going to find him in the 1890 census. So we're going to look for him in the 1900 census and see if we can find if indeed his father's name was Marion. In this case here, somebody has done the family tree already, so we can see what research they've done and whether or not it's accurate if we want to get some information here. So we can see here that this person has it going back already even further. So we could certainly do that, but I want to show you guys how to build it and do it right. So here we have a Clyde Leonard Morrison, born August 1884 in Illinois, living in Warren County, Iowa in 1900. So this sounds like our guy. Let's go ahead and take a look at this. Now, this one's a lot clearer to read, as you can see. Looks like they must be up at the top. All right, here we go. We can actually even see that they're on G Street in Indianola. So here's Marion M. Morrison. And again, these month and year, 1900 is the only census where the person actually gives a month and year they were born. And my experience is that like 30% of these are wrong. They're just estimating in many cases, and they're not always right. And sometimes people didn't know when they were born because in 1845, you don't have birth certificates. A lot of people didn't record the births at all. If they did, they had to go down to the courthouse and do it. And for some people, that was just too much work. They just didn't bother. So you can't always find that stuff, unfortunately. So January 1845, though. So what we're going to do is Ancestry makes this really easy. It allows us just to go ahead and save this stuff directly. So we're going to upgrade this to August 1884. So it's a little bit better than what we knew before. It's an estimate. His father, Marion M. Morrison, married Weltha around 1870. Now, Morrison's not going to be her maiden name, so I'm actually going to leave that blank because I don't want to put Morrison there. And then we've actually got some other children here. And why do the other children matter, even though they're not direct ancestors? Well, they're going to help us to find records because we're going to be able to look for that family. And if we look for an obituary or something and we see those siblings mentioned, we know we have the right person. So those can be very helpful things. So for the sake of getting back a little further quickly, there's a lot more we could find about his father and mother, and we could spend hours just digging into one person and looking at newspaper records and military records and all sorts of things. But I want to go to look at Marion because we have already read that he's possibly a Civil War ancestor. Yeah, Jacob, I am a Browns fan. Yes, absolutely. As Ralph said, he's a Browns fan. He has a brain, Jacob. That's right. So Marion Morrison, January 1845. What does that mean? It means he's 16 years old when the Civil War breaks out. If I see a guy born in the 1840s in Ohio in the United States, I'm immediately thinking, good chance this guy's a Civil War veteran. Well, how can I find out if he's a Civil War veteran? Well, there's a couple of things. I told you the 1890 census was destroyed in a fire. That's true. But there's a part of the 1890 census that wasn't destroyed, and it's called the Veterans Census. Anybody who was a Union veteran in 1890 who was living, or who had a widow who was living and might be receiving a pension, would be recorded in that census. And so if we know where he was living in 1890, we can look at that census and see if he reported any service. And if he did, he would even have said where he served, at what unit, his enlistment date and his muster out date, things like that. Looks like we've got a picture of him there. So we'll actually go ahead and save that. Again, you can't just automatically assume that it is that person, but for the sake of this, we're going to do that. Looks like Marion actually has a Civil War headstone. And we can kind of read it. It just says Company B. We're not able to see more than that, at least not on that particular record. Now, let's go ahead and go to findagrave.com. This is another fantastic site that can often give you some really good information. So this tells us he was born January 20th, 1845. And once we can fairly confidently find out that this is the right guy, and again, you can't just assume that. So this is John Wayne's grandfather. We've got some really good information here. Marion Mitchell Morrison, born 20th January 1845 in Cherry Fork, Adams County, Ohio. Adams County is southern Ohio. It's down south of Columbus. Died in Warren County, Illinois, 5th December 1915. We even have his father, who was James Morrison, born 21st September 1811, Cherry Fork, Adams County. Died in Warren County, Illinois. You can see that westward migration happening in this family. Martha Purdy, and that's actually her maiden name, so I'm actually going to put this in as her maiden name. Born in Virginia in 1814. And then here's Wealtha Chase. Now, isn't that interesting? And why do I say that? And this is where my interest gets piqued. Because when I start finding people with a name like Chase with connections to Ohio, well, there's a famous Chase family from Ohio. Salmon Chase was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He was governor of Ohio. He served as Lincoln's Secretary of the Treasury. So that's actually what I'm showing you guys, is how to get started in your family history. Lord Malcolm, thank you for that. Love your profile picture of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth. 100% agree. Stephen Browns are killing it, given the hand they've been dealt, like a fourth of their starting lineup out for the season. So Wealtha Chase, let's go ahead and update her information there. So then again, here's Clyde. Now we've got more information about him. August 20th, 1884, in Monmouth, Warren County, Illinois. And now we've got, again, she's not Pearl S, it was Pearl L. Sometimes those L's and S's, they get mixed up in these records. So we'll add her in there. So now we've got a little bit more information. Now, based on what we've added, Marion Mitchell Morrison, born January 25th. Let's see if we can find him in that 1890 census. So we know he's living in Warren County, Iowa in 1900. When Clyde was born, where's Clyde born? Warren County. Now that says Warren County, Illinois. Now that makes me wonder a little bit if somebody got something wrong, or if they actually moved from Warren County, Illinois to Warren County, Iowa. Well, that's what we're going to find out. First of all, what's he say? He was born in Illinois. So, okay. So maybe we're good there. So he's either in Warren County, Illinois or Warren County, Iowa in the 1890 census. So that's what we're looking for now to see if we can find his Civil War service. George W. Bush. We might have some family ties. Your great-grandfather was a neighbor of Marion Morrison. His name was Gabe Itch. Interesting. Very cool. Martin, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate it and glad you're enjoying the reactions. And David, thank you. A lot of new history books are from political media figures. That's true. Do you approach those with caution? No more caution than I would approach any other book. Just because a person's a political media figure doesn't mean they have any more or less bias than someone who's not. Everybody has biases, and that's why I always say you have to go in trying to understand what the author's bias is. So it actually makes it a little easier for me, say, if I know a book's written by Bill O'Reilly or Newt Gingrich, because I already know what their politics are, so I know what their biases are, and it makes it easier for me to filter that when I'm reading the book. If I don't know the biases of an author, it can sometimes be a little bit harder. Let's look for him in the 1890 census, because he was alive. So he should have reported military service in 1890 if we can find him. I'm trying to narrow this down now. Here we go. 1890 veterans schedules of the U.S. federal census. So now we've got to look for places, and it should match them based on most likely. So here's Pawnee, Nebraska. Now that's kind of interesting, because we don't have any record of that, but I'm not seeing him in these records. So that's kind of throwing me off a little bit on this one, because I'm not seeing him. He may not have reported it. He should have, but he may not have. So we might have to go somewhere. So Company B, it says on his tombstone, the top of his tombstone. So you guys actually aren't seeing any of this, are you? So I need to actually go back to the screen that you guys are looking at. All right, here we go. So I'm looking at the hints now to see. Looks like we might have an obituary for him. This will be kind of hard to read for you guys. It looks like that's just the second half of the obituary. It's talking about his funeral, maybe. So that didn't help us a lot. What do we have here? Oh, we've got an application for his headstone. Now we're talking. So here's the application for his military headstone, which actually only happened in 1995 or 1935. Okay, this is 1935. So this is 20 years after he died. Somebody applied for a military headstone for him. The screen wasn't frozen. I'm using StreamYard, and I've never used it before, and I've got it set to where it only stays on the one screen. So when I switch tabs, you guys don't see the other tabs. No, he didn't die in World War I. He died in 1915. He was like in his 70s at that point. So we're looking at Company B, 83rd Illinois. And it looks like he may have also served in Company E of the 61st Illinois. So now here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take you guys to another website that is fantastic for military records. An error. I don't need no errors. Come on now. All right. So we're going to look for Marion Morrison. We may need to just browse ourselves to find it. I may do this the old-fashioned way here. Let's go to compiled service records. They've changed how you do this and made it a lot harder, actually, than it used to be. So we've got to go to Illinois. Used to be able to just do this a lot simpler. U.S. Civil War Union. See all collections. Here we go. Oh my gosh. I don't know what they changed to how they do things on Fold 3, but they made it way more difficult. All right, so let's narrow this down to Illinois. There's his headstone application again, which we already saw earlier. Here we go. So this is the index to the service record. So that says Company B, 83rd Illinois. C also 61st Illinois Infantry. So we see that. Yeah, this is John Wayne's grandfather, actually. Yeah, Confederate records are also on Fold 3. In fact, I'll show you a couple of really good ones. So we're not going to find much on him in here, but let me show you what is possible with these records. In many cases, you've got the entire pension file. They don't have all the pensions up from the National Archives, but they do have a lot of them. All right, so let's just go back to Fold 3. Let's go to U.S. Civil War. So I'll show you a Confederate record for someone that I know is a relative of mine. This is my third great-grandfather's brother. So this is his complete military file from the Union Army. Now, let me tell you a little bit about what I know about Henderson Gearhart. He was 18 years old when he was living in Eastern Kentucky. And in Eastern Kentucky, you had a lot of, basically, first of all, you didn't have any traditional infantry. Pretty much all of the infantry that was recruited in Eastern Kentucky was what was known as mounted infantry. They traveled on horseback, fought on foot as infantry. So most of the Kentucky units are mounted infantry in the East. But a lot of times they would ride into a town and conscript all the young men who would then turn around and desert as quickly as they could. And so in this case, Henderson Gearhart has a brother who's in the Union Army. He's got at least two brothers in the Confederate Army. Literally, it's brother against brother in this family. And this unit, the 10th Kentucky Cavalry, which was very active in Eastern Kentucky, and I had literally dozens of relatives who were in that unit, rides into town. Olive Hill, Kentucky is where Henderson grows up. Rides into town, conscripts Henderson into the Confederate Army. He instantly deserts, and now he's mad, so he joins the Union Army. And we're going to learn a lot about his story because of that in here. Lord Malcolm, what shocked me most about the UK, not a lot, just because I'm an Anglophile, and so I knew a ton about the UK going there. So I wasn't really, I was very well prepared, and so there wasn't a lot that would have shocked me. I was blown away, though, by how friendly everyone was. Very friendly country by and large. People don't do a lot of small talk, like on the train and things like that. But if you were standing like at a train station and you were obviously trying to figure out where you were going, somebody would always walk up and offer help and things like that. And so I found the UK to be a very friendly country. So, all right. So here's what we find from Henderson Gearhart. He's Company F, 39th Kentucky Infantry. That was a mounted infantry unit. He's a big guy. He's 18 years old. He's 6 feet tall, fair complexion, blue eyes, light hair, born in Floyd County, Kentucky. He's a farmer. He enlists December 7th of 1862. We can see who signed him up for a 3-year period. Now we see here in the remarks, captured by rebels, June 27th, 1863. So already I've learned a bunch about Henderson just from that page. So now we're going to go to another page. It's going to tell us that he actually ended up a corporal in his company. And this is going to be a summary because they would do these returns, right? And so every 2 months you had a roll that was called, and they would kind of figure out who all they had. And you would see sometimes they'd be listed as absent on the day of the roll, and it would say why they were absent. And in this case, he's absent from the rolls because he's been captured by the rebels. Here it is, captured by the rebels, June 27th, 63 in Breathitt County, Kentucky, never returned. So what else can we find about him? Well, that's what's really cool about this is Well, we're not going to find it in this because this is just the miscellaneous card abstracts. So I actually want to go to his full military file. Now here's the same guy, Henderson Gearhart, Company C, 13th Kentucky Cavalry. This is sometimes also listed as the 10th Kentucky Cavalry, but there was another 10th. So sometimes this one gets listed as 13th. It's really confusing. But here you go. He's on the muster roll for October 1st, 1862. Well, we know, see, he's enlisted October 1st, 1862. Well, what did the other records say? That he enlisted in the Union Army on October 7th. So what happened? Ben Caudle, who's actually an uncle of mine, is the one who enlisted him. Well, what happened was he instantly deserted. He didn't even stick around. So that's a little bit more of what we know about him. Yeah, 6 feet in the 1860s, actually. Yeah, big guy indeed. Have I seen HBO's Conspiracy? Is that the one about the Vanity conference? If so, I haven't seen it yet, but I need to. Or is that is that the Vanity conference one that has Kenneth Branagh in it? Because then, if that's the case, I have seen it. How long was training for the South? I mean, in this case, there wasn't much of any training. You just trained as you went. Yes, I'm going to play some War of Rights, Michael, at some point. I've played it before, but it's been a long time. All right, so I want to find Henderson's full Union file because I know it's on here. That's not helping me. I'm going to have to browse for it, which used to be a lot easier. That's what I was saying earlier, is that the browsing feature on Fold 3 is suddenly much more complicated. I don't know what they did to it, but it sucks now. Now I have to go in and do it this way. See all publications. Let's narrow it down to U.S. Civil War. You used to just be able to go to the next level up on the sorting, and it was much easier. And I don't know what they did to it, but it's awful now. So I've got to go through the compiled service index records and go all the way to Kentucky. Can we narrow it down by state? Let's try to do it that way. That's Massachusetts. That's not Kentucky. What the heck? Fold 3. What did you do? This used to be so much easier. It's awful now. I can't even find Kentucky. It just skipped right over Kentucky and went to the other states. There we go. That's Confederates. That doesn't help me. We'll get to that, though. All right. This is really supremely frustrating because this used to be so much easier. Yeah, it's a big time L update for sure. In the meantime, even as a young man, it's wild for me to think that there may have been soldiers even younger than you. Oh my gosh. Yeah, Michael. And thank you for that. 12, 13, 14-year-olds, a ton of them. I want the Civil War service records for Kentucky. And it used to be if I was on Massachusetts like this, I could just go one more level up on the hierarchy and it would just list all the states. It won't let you do that anymore. And it's really frustrating because it used to be that simple. Like, I don't even want to use this website anymore. I'm so frustrated that they made that change. I don't understand why they would do that. I literally can't find it now. He may be listed as Gayhart. Let's try that. No. Ugh. See, this is the Confederate record, and this is the Union one. There's 18 pages. Okay, that's it. But it's only showing 2 pages. It says there's 18. Where'd the other 16 pages go for this? I'm so frustrated. Like, I don't even want to do this anymore. I'm so frustrated. Patrick, thank you for that. Having a great grandma who's alive at the age of 108. That is fantastic. What an incredible resource that you have. I'm so glad for you that you have her. New CK3 playthrough anytime soon. If I get time for more, I certainly will. SM 2022, thank you. Merry Christmas to you as well. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm excited for 2024. As I was mentioning earlier, I've got some big goals for 2024 with where I want to take not only this channel, but the other channels. And I'm hopefully going to announce some of those things pretty soon. Oh my gosh, I really want to find this for you guys because he's got such a fascinating story as far as what happened to him. And how this all went down. It's pretty unique among here we go. I can do it this way. So let's go to the 39th Infantry to G. So he's listed under H. Oh, there he is. Here's all 18 pages now. There we go. All right, now we're in business. So you'll notice there's the enlistment date, but then there's the joined for duty. So you signed up, but then that's not necessarily when you actually join the unit. In this case, he joins December 7th. He's the 8th corporal for Company F on the muster roll for February 28th. He's back down to private. I don't know what happened there, but then he's back up to corporal again in March and April's muster record. This is almost when he's going to be captured now. There it is. Captured June 27th, 1863. Now, let me skip ahead through all of these records because these are all not going to tell you much, but this is where it gets interesting. Here's a casualty sheet. Now, what the casualty sheet is going to tell us is that he ends up a casualty of some kind. Well, what kind of casualty? Let's find out. He's Corporal, Company F, 39th Infantry of Kentucky. Nature of casualty is death. My young 18-year-old, when he enlisted, uncle died. Cause of casualty not stated. He's added to the rolls here in September 15th, 1865 as having died. And here again, doesn't tell us anything, but here's what it says. Place of discharge or death, etc., Andersonville, Georgia. And that tells me everything I need to know about what happened to him. He died at one of the most horrible places you could end up. And I actually had the chance to visit there. And he's in, unfortunately, an unknown grave. We don't even know what date he died. We just know he died at Andersonville. But there's a little more to this record that is interesting here. Oh, you guys aren't seeing any of this, are you? Oh, my gosh. Okay. I'm sorry. Let me fix this. I'm going to switch it over so you can actually see it. It opened a new tab. Here we go. All right. So now you can see it. I'm sorry. I'm using StreamYard for the first time, and I'm still learning how all this works. So I've got it now, though. We're good. It wasn't frozen. It just was in a different tab. So there you see right there that it says that he died at Andersonville, Georgia. And I do know that there were other members of his unit that were there. But here's what's interesting about this story. He didn't initially get sent to a prison camp. Remember what I said earlier about Henderson initially was conscripted into the Confederate Army, immediately deserted and joined the Union Army. So when he was captured by the rebels in Breathitt County in June of 1863, he wasn't sent to a prison camp because here is a memorandum from prisoner of war records that tells us that Henderson Gearhart of 39th Kentucky Infantry was a prisoner of war sent to Richmond, Virginia, charged with desertion from the 10th Kentucky CSA. Now, remember, the other record said 13th. That's why I said that unit sometimes had both designations. But then it doesn't say. It says Richmond, Virginia, September 23rd, 1863, to be tried for desertion. But then we have no other record for what happens. We know that he was initially sent to Richmond, but then for whatever reason, he is sent from Richmond to Andersonville, Georgia. We don't know anything else about him. And there were other records I found that just say said to have died at Andersonville. So basically, the only reason we know that Henderson ended up in Andersonville and that he died there is because some of his buddies who were there came home, survived. Andersonville came home and said, "Oh, Henderson Gearhart died at Andersonville." There's no record of his death. There's no record of which grave he's in. Just that his buddies said that's what happened to him. So that's really about all we know. Will there be more redeemed Zoomer reactions, Alex? Yes, and thank you for that. We will definitely do that. Your seventh great grandfather was Lieutenant Colonel George Stewart. Who was at Yorktown. Very cool. Same rank as Alexander Hamilton at Georgetown. I'm not familiar with the story of Mance Jolly, unfortunately. And the European-specific family tree research websites. So if it's UK, there's one called findmypast.com that's really good. For Scotland specifically, there's one called Scotland's People that is a really good site. Baseball was invented before the American Civil War. They played baseball in Mexico, I think, in the Mexican War. Doubleday did not invent baseball. So we, all of that was that we were talking about Marion Morrison, who was the grandfather of John Wayne, and we were looking at his records. So I want to go back to that for just a second and see if we can find out anything about John Wayne's grandfather and where he served and when. So let's back it up a little bit here, and we're actually going to go back to Ancestry now. VTH invented baseball. Yeah, we'll go with that. All right, let's go back to the Morrison family tree. And you can see lots of hints here. When you're starting out a tree and you're not that far back, these hints are going to tend to be pretty good. So I think these are probably all fairly accurate as far as that goes. And Henry Parsons, there's a decent chance that he may have served in the Civil War as well. But let's go to Marion Morrison. And we're going to go back to these records and see if we can't find something more about. What I really want to find out is when he served, because we want to know. We can look up that unit and see what battles potentially that unit was at, but until we know when he was with those units, we can't necessarily say whether he was there. Okay, so here we go. So Marion M. Morrison, he enters the service at the age of 19. So he did enter in 64, it looks like. He's 5'7.5", which is pretty average height for the time. Born in Adams County, Ohio. Company B, 83rd Illinois for 3 years. There we go. He enters 25th February, 1864. So when he was transferred to the 61st Illinois, it was actually after the Civil War was over. So what we want to do now is we want to look at the 83rd Illinois and see, after February of 64, where did they serve? So see, for example, it was engaged at Fort Donelson, the Battle of Dover in 1863, but he wasn't there. And it looks like that was the only major battle they fought in. And that might seem disappointing to you, but that's actually the typical experience for a Civil War soldier. He was, now this is interesting. especially because we're talking about John Wayne's grandfather. Future lawman Virgil Earp was a private in the regiment. So there you go. John Wayne's grandfather was in the same regiment as Virgil Earp, who was Wyatt Earp's brother. That's actually pretty cool. So those are the interesting little things you find that I just really enjoy when I find them. But yeah, the average experience for a Civil War soldier was not to fight in 20 battles. A lot of these guys served in garrisons, served in places guarding supplies, might have fought in a couple of minor skirmishes, but by and large, most of the big battles, most of the men who served didn't fight in those. I have one ancestor. I have 13 direct ancestors who fought in the Civil War. 2 of them were in multiple significant battles. That's it. Most of the rest weren't involved in that many battles. Of course, a lot of them were in Kentucky, and a lot of the Kentucky units never left the state because there was too much going on in their own state. Yeah, so he literally had very little combat. So he enlisted in February 64. They had 200 miles of communications to guard. And this is one of the things I tell people all the time when they say, oh, Grant had it easy. He had unlimited supplies and manpower. Yeah, but they also had to march deep, hundreds of miles in enemy territory. And you didn't just march as an independent force. Everything behind you as you moved forward had to be guarded. Supply lines, communication lines, all of that stuff. And so you're constantly leaving men behind to deal with that kind of stuff. Units like this one were guarding 200 miles of communications. And so that's why they're dealing with like Nathan Bedford Forrest, doing cavalry raids on them behind the lines. That's the kind of stuff they're dealing with. So during the entire 4 years this unit was in the service, they lost 4 officers and 34 enlisted men killed or died of wounds, and 1 officer and 82 enlisted men died of disease. 121 fatalities. That's honestly not a lot. So John Wayne's grandfather, not too heavily involved in a lot of combat. Alex, thank you for that. You found out one of your ancestors got expelled from the Prussian army, migrated to the U.S., and joined the North 1 year after his arrival. That's pretty common. Let me show you a cool thing that I found. I'm going to show you some stuff now, just from my own family tree, just so you can see some of the stuff that's possible to discover. That's really, really cool. So we're going to go here to this guy. This is my 3rd great grandfather. His name's George Greenhill, and you'll see we have Enoch in parentheses. Well, there's a reason for that, because he was born Enoch Greenhill. So, for example, I'll show you here. This is his actual birth record. There's baptism record that we have. And this tells you a lot right here. It's so September 29th, 1826, Enoch, son of Joseph and Mary Greenhill of Bath Street. Joseph is a gilt toy maker. So gilt toys, they're not toys in the traditional sense, or any kind of trinket or any object that had like a metal overlay to it. So a gilt toy could be a lot of different things, but it was usually stuff that you put on display in your house, those kinds of things, collectibles. So that's what he did. And Birmingham had what was called the jewelry district, and that's where they lived, because there was a lot of this kind of manufacture of items like this going on. And that was what the Greenhills did. Born 22nd February 1826. That's really important, because this was a really difficult mystery to solve. And I'm just going to lay it out for you that we've discovered after years of research what we've come to the conclusion of. First of all, this is pretty cool. Here's George right here. This photo was actually taken just a couple months before he died. And that's my grandfather, who just passed away a year ago. That's his great-grandfather, and man, I can see my grandpa in him. This is my great-great-grandmother right here. We know that this picture was taken in the summer of 1892, specifically. But anyway, George Greenhill, born February 22nd, 1826. We know that from that record. we can look at him in some census records, things like that. So he shows up in the United States when he enlists on August 14th, 1848. This is when he arrived in the States. He gets right off the boat. 2 days after he gets off the boat, he enlists. August 14th, 1848. And here's what's really cool about this one. Look at this right here. Enlisted by Captain P. Kearney, 1st Regiment of Dragoons. And of course, as soon as I saw that, I thought to myself, P. Kearney, I wonder, being a Civil War guy, Phil Kearney, who was a Union general killed in 1862, probably would have ended up commanding the Army of the Potomac if he hadn't been killed. That's him. I went looking into his records and found out that he was a recruitment officer in New York City in 1848. So that's him. He enlisted my 3rd great grandfather, who then deserted 2 days later. It may have been that he enlisted in order to be able to get in the country a little easier. A lot of these guys got off the boat and enlisted instantly. So that was kind of interesting. But here's what's crazy about this. After that record, Enoch Greenhill ceases to exist. He is not in the 1850 census anywhere in the United States. And then a few years later, a George W. Greenhill shows up in Carter County, Kentucky. So first of all, here's another record here. This is actually his arrival and his actual enlistment record, right? I, Enoch Greenhill, born Birmingham in the state of England, 25 years old, occupation a button stamper, which again is a very similar line of work to the gilt toy makers, and a lot of his brothers were also button stampers. So this helps me narrow down that this is the same guy that came from Birmingham that I'm related to. Enlist on the 14th day of August 1848 for a period of 5 years. And so there's his mark. He couldn't read or write, so he puts an X, and then they write his name. And then it's signed by Phil Kearney right there, which is really awesome. He's 5'7", brown hair, fair complexion. And then Enoch ceases to exist in the records. Yeah, he deserted, and as near as we can tell, he then changed his name to George, which was his brother's name back in England. So why do we think it's him? Well, there's a couple of reasons why we're pretty sure that Enoch and George are the same person. Number one, because George doesn't exist before 1850 and Enoch doesn't exist after 1850. So the timing works as far as when one stopped existing and the other started existing. Another thing is the birth date, 22nd February, 1826. George's tombstone in Kentucky. I don't know what's going on here. These are the cool things that are great mysteries that sometimes take years to discover. We're going to have to go to find a grave so I can pull up his tombstone image for you. He died in 1892. So here's his tombstone in Carter County, Kentucky. Now, I've been to this tombstone, so I know that this is right, even though you can't really read it as well here, but it definitely says born February 22nd, 1826. So George W. Greenhill, Enoch Greenhill, one ceases to exist when the other starts existing. They're both born in Birmingham, England on the same day, because we know from George's records that he was born in Birmingham. But here's the most important thing that really caught my attention. A couple of things. Number one is DNA. I am genetically related to Enoch Greenhill's family. I can show you that here. In fact, I'll go to my grandfather's because it's a better match. So let's go to Enoch Greenhill's parents. So this is actually his grandparents. And this is where DNA can be really, really helpful in confirming hunches. I can assume those things are true. But now when I go in and I look and I see that I am genetically related to Enoch Greenhill's family, now I know I'm on the right track. So here's Joseph Greenhill, who's Enoch's father. And I have genetic cousins through Enoch's brother William, Enoch's brother Joseph, Enoch's sister Charlotte, and Enoch's brother Charles. And they all match with the right amount of DNA for George to be Enoch. But then the other thing is this, and this was just a real incidental thing for me. And I can't really, there's probably a way to show them side by side, but Charlotte, this is a photo of Charlotte Greenhill, who was Enoch's sister. She looks just like my photo of George. Like George looks like her with short hair and older. So there's a genetic connection. There's a physical resemblance. George had a daughter named Charlotte that is not just, and he had a son named Joseph, and a daughter named Mary. In fact, his oldest children's names were Mary and Joseph, which happened to be Enoch's parents' names. So all of this, and this is how it works in genealogy. Sometimes you take the preponderance of everything, you lay out all of that information, and you say, what is the most likely scenario here? And the most likely scenario is that Enoch deserted from the army upon enlistment, went to Kentucky, and changed his first name to George, and for the rest of his life lived as George. But he was the same guy. He never changed his birth date. He named his kids after family members. He said he was from Birmingham. He looks just like Charlotte. The DNA matches. It's the same guy. It's just really cool to find that kind of stuff. Josh, that was true, Josh Knoxville, during the Civil War, but I don't think that was the case here. Jay Harris, thank you. You have one of those in your family tree. Harris seems to have been stolen from the Welsh town Tree Harris, where my ancestor mysteriously moved to Scotland and changed his name. Wish I knew why. I had that happen in my grandma's line, where you had the Jacobin rebellion in Scotland, and my grandma's family, they were MacDonald, and he changed his name to Smith and fled the country. So our Smiths were actually McDonald's. Am I related to the Tafts? Not that I know of, even though they are from Ohio, but no relation that I'm aware of. Patrick, thank you for that. You're fortunate to have the DNA of yourself, your parents, 2 of your grandparents, and your 108-year-old great grandma. That is awesome. And it's really important, guys, if you're able to even get parents and parent siblings or grandparents, if you can. I was lucky enough to get 2 of my grandparents' DNA before they passed. It's really, really helpful because I only inherit 25% of my DNA from each of my grandparents, which means their DNA is going to be super helpful, much more helpful than my own in deciphering some of this stuff. Brandon, you're related to Peggy Shippen, Benedict Arnold's wife. Very cool. That is fascinating. So, Ralph, you have you'd love to find living relatives in England. I actually have connected with a few relatives in the Whitaker family. So I wrote a book about the Whitaker line of mine. So I'll show you that line here. So Joseph Whitaker, this is the guy I told you was born in Tipton but grew up in Scotland. And that was really confusing for me for a while because I had these 2 Whitakers living in Niles, Ohio, Joseph and Alfred. And when I first started out doing research, all the records said Joseph was born in England and Alfred was born in Scotland. So I assumed they weren't related. And that was a big mistake on my part to make that assumption, because it turned out Joseph grew up in Scotland and that was his brother. They just were born in different countries because the family moved to Glasgow for work. His dad was an iron worker, and Glasgow had a lot of iron works. They were making a lot of the iron and steel for the shipping industry in Glasgow. And that was where they went to work. So, this is one of my most recent immigrant ancestors here is Joseph Whitaker. Ancestry doesn't connect your DNA to the old country. It kind of can, though. Like I'll tell you, for example, look, where's Joseph Whitaker from? He's from Tipton, which is right outside of Birmingham. So that's my maternal grandmother's family. My maternal grandfather's family. Where was his Green Hill from? Birmingham. So those are both in the West Midlands of England, right? So let's take a look for a second at DNA, because this is what's kind of cool. When you look at origins, it can get that specific. Like I'll show you here's my grandfather's DNA, and we know his Green Hills were from Birmingham, right? Well, take a look at this, because this is pretty sweet. I got to zoom out. I don't know why it's not showing the, oh, I know why. Here we go. Look at the map. So it shows where his family's from. We got a little bit of Africa. We got a little bit of the Baltics there, but mostly from up in here. But look how specific it gets with England. It's like, yeah, England, but specifically the Midlands, and more specifically, the West Midlands. So that's really, really cool that you can get that specific and say, hey, yeah, you know what? You've got family from the West Midlands of England, because you've got a lot of DNA matches right there. So those are pretty neat connections to make. Patrick, thank you for that. 14% of your DNA comes from your great grandma. Exactly. So having the other 86% is absolutely beneficial. And it also helps you with the origins too, because just because you inherit. So for example, my grandfather's DNA, right? What's it say? He's 52% England and Northwestern Europe, 14% Scotland, 12% Ireland, Sweden and Denmark, Norway, etc. So just because I get a quarter of my DNA from my grandfather doesn't mean I get the same quarter of DNA that my sister got or that one of my cousins got from him. I might not have inherited the Scottish part of the DNA. I might have inherited more of the English DNA. I might not have inherited as much of the Irish. So my sister and I could show different amounts of Irish DNA. Doesn't mean that she has more Irish ancestors than me. She just inherited more of that strain of the DNA, that strand, than I did. So it's really complicated, but once you start to learn it, it makes a lot of sense. And my friend Jarrett at the YouTube channel Genia Vlogger does a great job of explaining a lot of that and how it all works. Which child am I from? Which child of who, I guess. So yeah, I'll show you a little bit of that particular ancestor, Joseph Whitaker, because he's pretty cool. Because he's got 16 kids. Actually, his obituary said he had 18 because he was married before, so he might have had children with the first one. But here you go. Elvira is his wife, and my third great grandmother, Elvira. And look at this. First child born in 1872 when she had just turned 16 years old. And then all the way up to 1901, they're still having kids. This girl had children for 30 years. 29 years between first and last. And I'm actually descended from the oldest son, who also happens to be the only one we don't have a picture of the kids, which is really frustrating. But Edward is my great-great-grandfather right there. Elvira, the Oak Ridge Boys song. My heart's on fire for Elvira. That's exactly what I thought the first time I found out that I had a great-great-great-grandmother named Elvira. Almost puts Maria Theresa to shame. Yes. Visited Maria Theresa's grave when I was in Germany and Austria. I do have some German blood relatives. In fact, my last name, which is Maori, is German. It's not English. My German family came from a little town called Guggenbach in Germany. In fact, I'll show you where it's at here. They were Maurer, Maurer, and like a lot of names, it got anglicized over the generations. But this is where my Maurers came from, is this little town right here, Guggenbach, which is, as we back out a little bit, it's kind of between Nuremberg and Stuttgart, right in that area there. I do hope to get there someday. Yeah, it was Maurer, actually. It was Maurer to Mourer to Moury, and then eventually to that. That's kind of how it went. In fact, if you go down to Kentucky to this day, where my family comes from, they pronounce it Maury. So it's almost like Maury, which is kind of a hybrid of what it was and what it became. All right, who's my favorite ancestor? Man, that's like asking me to pick my favorite kid. I don't have a favorite child. I love all my kids. I don't know that I have a favorite, but I'll show you a couple of interesting ancestors. How's that? Both of my parents descend from one particular ancestor who's pretty interesting. Let's see if I can remember where one of the lines are. It goes back to this one. Here we go. Oh, there she is. So both of my parents descend through multiple lines from Pocahontas. So that's obviously an interesting ancestor of mine. I'm descended from the Hamiltons, which is pretty cool. I think I can remember where that line comes in. Let's see. I'm trying to remember where my Hamiltons are. I've got so many lines. I mean, you can see how many ancestors I found from 30 years of research, and there's so many interesting stories I could tell you about all of these different folks. It just goes on and on and on. Through this Mullins line, I'm related to the Christian singer Rich Mullins, who's a cousin of mine. There's the Holbrook line, so I'm related to all the Holbrooks, including my cousin Boyd Holbrook, who's an actor. Here's a really interesting ancestor of mine. So this is my fourth great grandmother. Her name's Cheney Cottle. And then actually her daughter, Peggy Cottle, is my third great grandmother. I think I can show you a census record of them. The reason I show you them is because Peggy, my third great grandmother, and her mother, Cheney, were born as slaves. They were black. Cheney was most likely the daughter of her owner and a slave woman whose name, unfortunately, is lost to history. Cass Z, thank you for that. You discovered 20 planes crashed around your town in Netherlands during World War II. You even had contact with one of the pilots in the U.S. after the war. Wow, that's really cool. Ralph, I went to school with a Josh Holbrook, who was a cousin of mine, too. Yeah, I don't know if my line goes back to Priscilla Mullins or not. But so let's take a look here. For example, this is the first record, census record after they were freed, and so it's the first one that they're actually listed by name in the census. And it's a little blurry. But here's Cheney Cottle, my fourth great grandmother. She's black. She's 34 years old, and she's got 3 children with her. A 6-month-old named Genoa, who's female, who's black. Mary, who is actually 4 years old and a female and black, and Peggy, who's my third great grandmother, 16, female and black. You notice there's no father listed in any of these cases. Cheney had a bunch of children, and we don't really know the fathers of any of them, unfortunately. Ralph, it's certainly possible. Geauga County is only a county away from where I grew up, so. Yeah, so that's an interesting ancestor of mine, just because of the slave connection there. What else can I show you that is pretty interesting? My Hamilton line is actually one of the lines through which I descend from royalty. Jemima's got a pretty interesting line. We can go back pretty far on hers. Um, let's see. So there's one of my German lines there. Hirschman. They were from Bavaria. Kauerheim. I actually never looked to see where Kauerheim is. That actually would be kind of interesting, because I was just in Bavaria. I hope it wasn't really close to where I was, because I'd feel really terrible if I was that close and could have gone there. No, it's not. It's actually just east of Nuremberg, and I was down in Munich. Oh, well, if you can get your family tree back to any sort of nobility, you can go back super far. I mean, you can go back to Charlemagne without much trouble. I've got a bunch of lines back to Charlemagne. But you have to understand, by the time you get back to the 1600s, you literally have millions of ancestors at that level, because you remember every generation it doubles. So it's almost meaningless by the time you get back that far, because everybody's going to have the same ancestors. If for example, if your family tree all comes from England, you're all going to be there's a good chance you're descended from royalty in that situation. Let's see, who am I looking for here? Oh, it's on the Abrams line. That's where it is. So here's the Drakes, kind of tangentially related to Sir Francis Drake, because I have a Francis Drake also from Devonshire in my family tree, who was a cousin of the Sir Francis Drake. But Fitz Randolphs, here we go. So the Fitz Randolphs have really, really cool ancestry, because that's where I get to go back to the Percys. In fact, maybe that's not the line. Here we go. Yeah, so now we're talking about the Percys, the famous Percys, the Cliffords. So these are some royal families who are going to have royal ancestry if you go back far enough. So that's the De Bruce line, like as in Robert the Bruce. Elizabeth Blossom. Thomas Blossom was a deacon in the Pilgrim Church. There's actually existing letters of him that he wrote to Governor Bradford, and he was actually on the other ship. There was the Mayflower and the Speedwell. And the Speedwell kept springing leaks, and they kept having to go back. So eventually they took as many people off the Speedwell as they could. They stuffed them onto the Mayflower, and whoever was left had to go back. And Thomas was one of the people who went back. Can you make a good ancestry tree with the free version? Yeah, I think you probably can. Thomas Blossom's a pretty interesting one. And he is also, by the way, an ancestor of George W. Bush and Barack Obama. They're also descended from Thomas Blossom. So they're my distant cousins through that line. Who else do we have? Oh, here we go. This is a good line. If you've ever read anything about the Wars of the Roses or read any of Shakespeare's plays, you'll be familiar with Clifford, who is a character in Shakespeare's plays. Well, this is my ancestor, Sir John the Butcher, 9th Baron Clifford. John Clifford killed the Earl of Rutland in the Wars of the Roses. The Earl of Rutland was a brother to King Edward IV, to Richard III. He was a brother of theirs, and John killed him. And then he was killed at the Battle of Towton, actually a place called Ferrybridge, which was a precursor to the Battle of Towton. So John Clifford, though, is descended from some even more famous people. In particular, the Mortimers, and therefore Edward III is an ancestor of mine through John Clifford. Here's Henry III. And of course, I descend from King John through that line, and Henry III, and Edmund Crouchback, his son. Here's Lord Dacre in that line. The Nevilles, I'm descended from in that line. So, like I said, once you get back to some of those nobility lines, your family tree just will open up like crazy, because you're going to find so many records available in those particular lines that you might not otherwise be able to find. What is my opinion on the Manchester City comeback versus Everton tonight? I haven't seen that yet, so interesting. Anyone I'm not related to? No, everybody's related to everybody if you go back something far enough. Star Sailor, I think I did receive that. It's upstairs waiting to be opened. I didn't open it yet because I want to do it on camera, because I don't want to miss any of those when I'm unboxing and opening things. So I'll be doing that very soon. But yes, I did get a letter, so I'm assuming that's the one that came from you. No English records from Sussex in my tree that I'm aware of. Who's my favorite Civil War general? Grant. Janine, thank you for that. Best site to do genealogy on. Ancestry to me is the easiest. It's not really easy to transfer your stuff. That's why I still use Ancestry to kind of store my family tree for the most part. It's still the easiest site to use, I think, but I supplement that heavily with FamilySearch.org, Fold3, Find My Past. My Heritage has a lot of great newspaper records that others don't have. I use newspapers.com a lot. And I'll show you how newspapers can be really helpful. Let me just show you a few examples of that. I guess I got to sign in first. Rank my favorite 80s songs, Christian. Yes, I'll have to do that. So I'll just show you some of the stuff that I found because of newspaper records, stuff you aren't going to find in just regular records. These are just some of the ones that I've clipped over time that you can just get really interesting. All right, so here's a good one. So I'm descended from this family known as the Stillwagons. My great-great-grandmother was a Stillwagon. And I found this article from 1908 in the Pittsburgh Post. Descendants of Peter Stillwagon, who's my fifth great-grandfather, after $28 million estate, claiming title to property valued at $28 million and now in possession of the German government, descendants of Peter Stillwagon, who came from Germany to America during the War for Independence. He actually came before the war. He was a veteran. Have banded together to obtain a settlement from the Kaiser's government. The story of their claims open with the usual romantic flight of the young son of a rich man from the old country, Peter Stillwagon being the only son in this case. The majority of them live in Connellsville, Pennsylvania. That's absolutely true. Have, with Elmer Stillwagon of this city, traced their descent with exactitude. And so it talks about how much each person is hoping to get. Never have found any more information about that. So then you find just little bits of information that are funny and cool, that tell you a little bit of something. My fourth great-grandfather, Daniel Survey, massacred a calf 6 weeks old, which dressed 122 pounds. We don't know much about post offices, but we do about calves. And that was the article from the Clarion, Pennsylvania Democrat in May of 1889. So there's all kinds of little tidbits like that I was able to learn about Dan Survey. For example, October of 1889, he purchased a fine organette, and they had the pleasure of hearing some fine music from it last week. So once you get deeper, you want to find more than just birth dates and death dates and names. You want to find out who these people were. And that tells me a little bit about this guy. He was a Civil War veteran who was in the cavalry and served as a courier during the war. And it was really cool stuff. Puka, thank you. Yes, more pictures you may not have seen, videos actually coming very soon, hopefully in the next few weeks. And my family and I are doing well. But you can also find, really important stuff too about deaths and things like that. This one is about my fourth great grandfather, Howard Collins, and his son Charles, alleged moonshiners who were released on bond while awaiting trial. They were converted by Salvation Army officers and will go to their mountain home in Owsley County to preach the gospel. That is the most Kentucky article I have ever found in my life, in my family. I just love that stuff. Draft registration cards are excellent sources of information. Yeah, I think I have reacted to Sabaton's Father. Pretty sure. It's a fantastic song. What else did I find in newspaper records? Oh, yeah. There's dozens of articles from all over the country about this one. I showed you my ancestor, Joseph Whitaker, who came from England by way of Scotland. This is his brother. John Whitaker, a laborer at the Niles Nail Mill, was killed and decapitated by a freight train at that place Saturday night while in a state of intoxication. He was 28 years of age and without family. There's actually other more detailed examples of that same story that actually tell us that Joseph walked him home, that they both got drunk. And actually that John walked Joseph home because Joseph was drunk, and then John went back and passed out on the railroad tracks on his way back. This is an article I found about a cousin who shot and killed his sleeping wife and then killed himself. And this is a family in which I have found 5 generations of serious mental health issues in that family. My great-great-great-grandfather was listed as insane in records, and like 5 generations of that family, including this guy who was a nephew of his. There's this stuff. It's very tragic and very sad to read, but it ran in that family big time. But these are the kinds of things you don't necessarily find from records. This is my 7th great-grandmother, Mrs. Elizabeth Stillwagon of Connellsville, PA, aged 115 years, was burnt to death on Monday last by her clothes, taking fire while lighting her pipe. There's another version of this article that talks about how she lived with her grandson, and he went to the store, and when he came back, the newspaper says he found the old lady burned to a crisp. I don't think she was actually 115. You know what? This is a great example of something we can look at. That newspaper article says 115. You'd think, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I had a 115-year-old ancestor. Well, not quite. Because that's what some of the family said she was. But if you look at more records, she wasn't that old. So let's take a look at her for a minute here. Here she is, Elizabeth Poole. She's probably born around 1848, which means she was most likely 105, 106 when she died. Her story actually got published as far away as Alabama. Look at this. She was 115 years old and her husband was a Revolutionary soldier. That's absolutely true. All right, hold on. I got to make sure I show you guys this stuff. So she's married in 1775. If she was 115 in 1854 when she died, then she would have been like 45 when she got married for the first time. And most of her kids were born after that marriage date. So she had a son born in 1801, which even by the records that we have, puts her around 50 when she had him, which I don't think is accurate. She may have even been younger than that. She may have been born in the early 1750s. But she definitely was a Revolutionary War veteran's widow. But she's my fifth great-grandmother. So let me just look at one of the census records. So she died in 1854. So let's look at her in the 1850 census and see how old she says she is there. Because she would have to be about 110, right, in this record to be 115 in 1854. She'd be like 111, actually. So here she is. Now, according to this, she's living by herself, which is incredible on its own. She's not living with anybody. And she's listed as 105 in the Connellsville census for that record. Have I had an ancestor that was murdered besides in war? I've had hanged ancestors. No, but I did do research for a friend of mine whose ancestor was the first woman executed in America, in the American colonies, after slitting the throat of her 4-year-old daughter, which is crazy. Now, you want to talk about some Jewish records. I'm going to wrap this up before too long here, but let me show you what I've just started working on. Some Jewish records. My daughter's boyfriend is an Orthodox Jew, and so he's like 100% Jewish, right? So here's his family tree. I mean, it's as Jewish as you can get, and so he's got a lot of connections to the Holocaust. And this is what I found particularly interesting. I think it's Frida. Let me take a look. Yeah. So what I found so far is she was in the Łódź ghetto in Poland until it was liquidated in August of 1944. Then she was sent to Auschwitz. She was not exterminated. She was sent to a labor camp. She was sent to Ravensbrück and ended up in 1945 at Bergen-Belsen. And when I saw that, I kind of perked up. And this is where it helps to know history. As soon as I saw she was in Bergen-Belsen in 1945, I said to him, his name's Aryeh. I said, Aryeh, you know, your great-grandmother was in the same camp as Anne Frank at the same time. That's where Anne Frank died, was at Bergen-Belsen in 1945, probably in February or March. So there's a decent chance that my daughter's boyfriend's great-grandmother, Frida, met Anne Frank when they were in the camp together. Possible. They were both young girls. Frida's a little older. She's in her early 20s by that point. But it's possible. And he said that was one of the, obviously it's not cool that your great grandmother was in a concentration camp. It's awesome that she survived, but it was a really cool connection to history for him to discover. So those are the kinds of things where history and family history intersect in a really amazing way. And they give you a new appreciation for the history when you find your family's personal connection to it. I was never that interested in, for example, the battle at Fort Donelson. It seemed kind of a minor thing to me until I found out I had an ancestor who was there. And then suddenly it was really, really interesting to me. Or little skirmishes in Eastern Kentucky that I otherwise might not have thought much about. But once I found out I had ancestors who were there, suddenly those skirmishes became very interesting to me. So it's cool how that works. Take a couple more questions before we wrap up here. Hayden, thank you for that. You love my constructive history videos, giving good facts about history. Thank you. Really appreciate that, and I'm glad you enjoy it. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the full screen now that we're done working on the family history stuff for now. Any tips for people looking into their family history? Random guy on the internet. The first thing I would say is start talking to whatever oldest relatives you have living, distant cousins, aunts and uncles, grandparents, if you have them. If you don't have any of those people, it's a little harder, but it's a great place to start. Write down everything they say. I have pages and pages of notes from talking to my great aunt on the phone. And sometimes it was years before some of the stuff she told me fit into the story. But I would always go back and look at those notes. And even years later, I would be like, oh man, that's what she was talking about. That's how this fits in. So write down all you can, record it, use your phone and record the conversations, that kind of stuff. It'll come in handy and you'll really appreciate it. Yeah, Professor What had his job easy today. The chat was easy. So Jack Spiracy, do I have relatives? Just distant cousins, and I've met a few through the internet that I'm hoping to connect with when I'm back over there again. Kyle, yes, I was just talking about this. Somebody else asked about that. I'm definitely going to look at some more old photographs in the near future. Ralph, yeah, I have thought about doing some local history. There's a lot of great local history that we could do. I just got to find the time. I just don't already have enough time to do all the things I want to do. So I'll try to get there. Has anyone ever told me I have a striking resemblance to Tennessee Ernie Ford? No. Most often I get Tony Romo, which I never saw myself. Like I never would have thought I looked like Tony Romo, but literally at least once a week, somebody tells me I look like Tony Romo. Biggest regrets not jotting down family history or oldest relatives? Absolutely. I had a great grandmother alive till I was 12 that I never got to meet, who lived down in Kentucky. And that's a huge regret for me that I never had the chance to meet her. What am I having for dinner this evening? That's a great question. I don't know. I'm on my own for dinner tonight, so I might just throw a Hungry Man in the oven or something. Maybe make some ramen. I don't know. Nothing too fancy. I'll cook tomorrow. John, what's going on, man? John's going to be with me in Italy in a couple of months. Your cousin works for the Mahoning Valley Historical Society. Very cool. Bill Lawson. Interesting. Yeah, I'm only a couple miles away from there. It's midnight in England. Yeah. Where was my ancestor during the battle for Fort Donelson? He was in the Union Army. He was in Logan's Division, I think. Yes, I am, George, making a video about goals for 2024 for the channel. Be expecting that by the end of the year, which is 4 days away. So that'll be coming real soon. Does Barry Manilow know you raid his wardrobe? I don't know. Does he? Do I? Do I think Fort Bragg should have been changed to Fort Liberty? Yes, and it doesn't even have anything to do with the fact that he was a Confederate general. It said he was a terrible Confederate general. Why did we name forts out after some of the worst generals that we had? Why was there ever a Fort Bragg? I don't get that at all. But I have no problem with the changing of the names to forts. It makes total sense that we not have Army forts in Army and Navy, Air Force, whatever, named after people who, for all intents and purposes, were traitors to the country. Two of your great-great-grandparents died in Mahoning County. Very cool. Yeah, I live in Mahoning County. That's awesome. Grew up in Trumbull County, live in Mahoning now. All right, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up, guys. Thank you so much for your patience with me and trying a new streaming software today. I'll perfect it and get better at it. We're going to stream more often. That's one of the reasons I wanted to start using StreamYard to make the stream a little more easy to follow and more interactive and be able to put the chats up on the screen, that kind of stuff. So definitely going to be streaming more. Thank you to everybody who donated in the chat, and we'll see you again real soon. You guys if I don't see you sooner, Happy New Year. Hope you have a fantastic holiday.